Okay, today we are going to talk about a topic which I didn't originally include in this essay, and that is when the Beit Din itself, the Supreme Court itself, makes a wrong instruction. What is the extent of our own personal responsibility, and where is the extent of their responsibility? And the reason why I included this is because there are so many new ideas that kind of seeped into Judaism, which aren't really original, or they're not native to Jewish thinking and Jewish thought. For instance, this whole concept that the rabbi, he's like the man of God and he doesn't err, he doesn't make mistakes. Like, anybody who believes that needs to take an entire tractate out of the Mishnah and out of the Talmud and just let it go. And in my opinion, the concept that even the Supreme Court of Israel, 71 Chachamim that were got semicha all the way, with the line of semicha all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu, that even they can make a mistake. And when they make a mistake, we'll see how strict it is, to what extent it's their responsibility, and where it's your own personal responsibility to say, no, I'm sorry, but you made a mistake. Even they can make a mistake, and you need to be able to know and identify when they make a mistake. Okay, so let's start. It's called Hora'at Ta'ut. I said in this essay, it's almost everything is completely quoted except for the footnotes. Over here, I put in a rather long, relatively long footnote. I said, Zehu Ikar Gadol B'Torat Yisrael. And this is a fundamental principle, in my opinion at least, in the Torah. Shelo kmo datei ha'amim, she'en efsharut lit'ot mitzad ha'melech o ha'mosad ha'dati, right? Which, in opposition to any other religion, or any other, even like political system, there is no a place for error. The Vatican comes out with some new idea, some new law. It can't be a mistake, because they are the supreme authority. They can't make a mistake. Nobody could point out to the Vatican or to the Pope that he made a mistake. Nobody could point out to the Almighty King, or right, the one who wears the crown, was crowned by the Vatican, that he made a mistake. Right? Nobody could come to the king or the religious institute. There is nobody who's authorized to point out a mistake. However, with us, Israel, in our nation, Torah sivalanu Moshe, Morasha kehilat Yaakov. Right? Torah sivalanu, right? Moshe commanded, instructed us with the Torah. Lanu, the people, and not the Supreme Court. They just represent the people. Morasha kehilat Yaakov, the legacy of the community of Yaakov. ומרוב הגלות ומשפעה מן הנוצרות עיקר זה נשכח והומר במושג אמונת חכמים, דאס תורה, right? But with the extent of our 2,000-year-long exile, some foreign ideas have entered, unfortunately, Judaism, and this competing idea of emunat hachamim, where you must follow the rabbis no matter what they say, has seeped in, which is completely contradictory to the fundamental yesod of the Torah, that even the greatest hachamim can make a mistake. הבא לעקור את היסוד הזה מתורת ישראל, שלפיה אסור ליהודי הפשוט, right? A simple Jew, right, doesn't have the means to challenge an instruction of the rabbi. אלא מה שאומר הרב או הצדיק, right, or whatever the pious person says or the rabbi says, כדברי אלוהים חיים וכהלכה למשה מסיני. It's as if God himself has told it to you. אין הדבר כן חנינה. So God forbid should this really be the reality with us. אלא זכותו, it's everyone's right, וחובתו, right, and his obligation, של כל אחד ואחת מישראל, for every man and woman of the Jewish nation to know when the Supreme Court itself is wrong in its instruction. ולא ננהוג בהוראתן, and in that case, you are not meant to follow their instruction. Go against their instruction. שאם ינהג בהוראתן, הוא יהיה חייב בקורבן חטאת ולא בית הדין. For if you were to follow the wrong instruction of the Beit Din, right, in most cases, and we'll see in what case the Beit Din is responsible, but in most cases, most likelihood, you are the one who are responsible for that mistake. And you are going to have to bring the Korban Hatat in the Beit Mikdash, assuming that we have a Beit Mikdash and have the Korbanot again, instead of the Beit Din bringing for the entire public who made a mistake. It's every individual has his own responsibility and therefore needs to bring his own Korban Hatat. ובמקרה הזה מדובר על בית דין הגדול של ישראל, right? And we're talking about, this whole chapter talks about the Supreme Court of 71 Hachamim, each received semicha from someone who received semicha, ish mipi ish, all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu. Im hem yecholim litot, right? If they can give you a false instruction, a wrong instruction, if they can make a mistake, kol sheken, so much so any great rabbi or even the greatest rabbi in the generation, he too can also make a mistake, right? Especially someone in our generation or any time throughout our last 2,000-year exile. Any one of them could have made a mistake, and it's each person's responsibility to be informed enough and knowledgeable enough of the law to know when they make a mistake. So especially during the past 2,000 years, once there is no more semicha, of course, anybody could make a mistake. All right? And we see here, Anistarot la'Hashem Eloheinu, right? Anything that is beyond us is to God. V'haniglot, right? V'niglot is what they call Torah hanigle, the halacha, the law, which is all available and easily accessible to everybody. Lanu ulvanenu ad olam, right? That is our heritage, us, our and our children's heritage forever, ad olam. La'asot et divrei haTorah hazot. Any matters pertaining to law, practical law, what to do, that is completely in the domain of every one of us. V'haniglot in halachot ha'pesukot. And those are the halachot, the actual laws. And this is a quote from the Rambam in Hilchot Yesodei HaTorah, ve'efshar sheyidaem hakol. Right, he says there are the esoteric matters, we call that the nistar, right? The sodot, or the secrets of the Torah, right? However, the niglot, the things that aren't the secrets of the Torah, is practical law, how to behave, what you need to do on a daily basis. And he says, ve'efshar sheyidaem hakol. Everybody can know it. Gadol ve'katan, a great man, or an adult, or a child, or a simpleton. Ish ve'isha, a man and woman. Ba'al lev rahav, somebody who is very wise, and his wisdom encompasses many, many different disciplines. Uva'al lev katzar, or someone who is very simple-minded. The practical laws are accessible to everyone, and everyone has a responsibility to know how to follow the law. And there is no advantage here in being some great rabbi who studied Torah his whole life, right? So maybe they have an advantage in the more subtle things in the Torah. Maybe they have tremendous wisdom and they can go very deep into the text and the subtext of the Bible or of the Midrashim. However, halakha lema'aseh, what you're allowed to eat and not allowed to eat, or what you can do on Shabbat and what you're not allowed to do on Shabbat, right? What's hametz and forbidden on Pesach, and what's not hametz and anyone can eat on Pesach. All these things are things that anybody, right, should be able to know for themselves and even point out to the greatest genius of our generation when he made a mistake in his instruction, even if it's the Supreme Court. That is the general principle. And now we'll actually go into the text, the laws themselves. כל דבר שחייבים על שגגתו חטאת קבועה, אם שגגו בית דין הגדול בהוראה, והורו להתירו, ושגגו העם בהורייתן, ועשו העם והם סומכים על הורייתן, ואחר כך נודע לבית דין שטעו, הרי בית דין חייבים להביא קורבן חטאת על שגגתן בהוראה. All right, repeat it. Any, כל דבר, any law, that if someone who transgresses this law would have to, accidentally, would have to bring a hatat, a korban hatat. For instance, hametz bepesach, right? Someone eats bread on Pesach. If he does it deliberately, he is hayav karet. He gets cut off from the nation. However, if someone were to accidentally eat bread, either maybe he forgot it was Pesach, he didn't mean to eat hametz on Pesach, he ate hametz because maybe he didn't realize it was hametz what he ate, or he didn't realize it was Pesach, so he did it accidentally. And so any law like this, where if someone were to accidentally transgress it, they would be obligated to bring a korban afterwards. If the Supreme Court themselves made a mistake in their hora'ah, for instance, you say hametz, there are 5 types of grain that are hametz on Pesach, right? Let's say like wheat and barley and oat. And let's say the Beit Din says wheat isn't hametz, and they made a mistake. And as a result, the nation ate hametz because they prepared things from wheat that went over 18 minutes, 20 minutes till it, rose and got big, and it became absolute hametz, and they ate it. They didn't mean to eat hametz; they just didn't realize that they were doing an error, right? So if the Beit Din instructed that, let's say, wheat isn't hametz, v'horu lahatiro, and they instructed that it is permissible, v'shagegu ha'am b'horayatan, right? And the nation, they did a shegaga, they unintentionally did transgress an isur, relying on the instruction of the Beit Din. Ve'asu ha'am, and they didn't just say, wheat is interesting, wheat is not hametz, but they actually prepared bread from wheat on Pesach. Vehem sumchim al horayatan, and they are relying on this hora'ah of the Beit Din. Ve'achar kach noda lebeit din sheta'u, and later on, the Beit Din realized that they made a mistake. Harei Beit Din hayavin lehavi hatat al shegegatan b'hora'ah. Then the Beit Din, right, needs to bring a korban to represent the entire nation. And not every individual who ate bread on Pesach brings the korban, but the Beit Din itself brings the korban. ואף על פי שלא עשו הן בעצמן מעשה. Even if those judges sitting in the Beit Din, the Supreme Court, didn't themselves eat bread, hametz, on Pesach. For instance, they say, we think it's mutar. We tell everybody it's mutar. You can make bread from wheat on Pesach. Wheat isn't one of the 5 grains. But they themselves didn't either. They say minhag hasidut, and we're not going to, or just for whatever reason they didn't eat bread themselves. It makes no difference. She'en mashgichin an asiyat Beit Din klal, because we don't care whether they themselves practiced or not. Ben asu ben lo asu, whether they did it or not. Ela horayatan bilvad. We only care about their instruction. And the rest of the nation, ushar ha'am peturin min korban, the rest of the nation is exempt from bringing a korban. Right? Let's say 5,000 people brought a korban, or a million people relied on their instruction and ate bread. Instead of a million people bringing a korban hatat, the Beit Din brings one for everyone. V'af al pi shehem ha'osin, right? Even though it was the people themselves who transgressed and not the Beit Din is the one who needs to bring the korban. Why? Because they relied on the instruction of the Beit Din. That is the general law. And now we are going to see in what cases it doesn't apply. And you tell me what you think would be more frequent, the cases it doesn't apply or the cases where it does apply. It says, Bameh devarim amurim. In what case is it so that the Beit Din needs to bring the korban and the people themselves who relied on them don't have to bring the korban? First, B'shehayu hamorim Beit Din hagadol shel 71. Okay, the first condition is that the ones who made the instruction was the Supreme Court of 71 judges. Meaning if it was just one rabbi, it doesn't apply. If you relied on the instruction of one rabbi and made a mistake, you yourself are liable and responsible. However, if it's the Supreme Court itself who made the instruction, right, that is the first condition. The second condition, and also, not only do they have to be 71, the Supreme Court of 71, but also the president of the Beit Din was there and was present during that hora'ah. And he also partook in that wrong instruction. And everyone needs to be qualified to instruct. 71 judges of the Supreme Court with the president of the Supreme Court, and each one of them is qualified to be an instructor of halakha. And they all made the mistake, or at least the majority of them said that that wheat is not hametz on Pesach, and therefore you relied on their instruction. You see, there are 7 conditions here. The 5th condition, and they shall say, wheat is permissible. They have to specifically say wheat is permissible to eat on Pesach. It is not hametz. Go make bread based on wheat. And also to those who heard the instruction from the Beit Din, right? They heard from the Beit Din, it's mutar. And I'm going to go tell my friends, oh, by the way, the Beit Din said it's mutar. And the entire population of Israel, at least the majority of them, meaning if we're 8 million people today in Israel, Jews in Israel, at least 4 million actually ate bread relying on the Beit Din. ויהיו העושים שוגגים על פיהם ומדמים שהדבר שהורו בו כדת הורו. And this The sixth condition, those who relied on the instruction of the Beit Din and prepared bread and ate bread on Pesach, right? They themselves didn't know that wheat isn't one of those, is one of those 5 grains that are prohibited on Pesach, right? They didn't know. They themselves are shogegim, umedanim, and they thought that whatever the Beit Din instructed, they properly instructed, meaning they didn't already know that wheat is forbidden. Because if they were to know that wheat is forbidden, then they are personally responsible and need to bring the korban themselves. 4 million korban hatat need to come to the Beit Mikdash. And the 7th, ויורו לבטל מקצת ולקיים מקצת, לא שיעקרו כל הגוף. Right? And the instruction is not that they completely dismissed an entire mitzvah. They didn't say there is no prohibition to eat hametz on Pesach. But what they said was there are only 5 grains that are forbidden on Pesach. There are only 4 grains that are forbidden on Pesach. Wheat isn't one of those 4 grains, and therefore you're allowed to make bread from wheat on Pesach. So they didn't completely annul a mitzvah. If they were to do that, then, well, you need to know, you're expected to know better than, excuse me, Beit Din, but it's explicit in the Torah that we're not allowed to eat hametz on Pesach. So how could you come and tell me that there is no mitzvah of not eating hametz on Pesach, meaning they only cancel a part of the mitzvah and not it in its entirety. And when they learn of this mistake, under these 7 conditions, and they know the exact, they know the mitzvah that they wrongly instructed. In all of these cases, in these cases, under these 7 conditions, is when the Beit Din itself needs to bring a korban and not people personally. And whoever follows their instruction is exempt from being a korban. However, if even one of these 7 conditions isn't met, Hare Beit Din peturin mina korban, then the Supreme Court is exempt from bringing the korban. V'chol mi sheshagag ve'asa ma'aseh mevi hatat kivua al shegigato. Right? And the people themselves, even if there were 4 million of them who relied on this wrong instruction of the Beit Din, if one of these 7 conditions weren't met, each one of those 4 million people who ate a bread made from wheat on Pesach, they are responsible to bring their own korban shegaga. Any questions so far? Or anybody have any comments? What do you think? What do you think of this law? How about Ashira? Any thoughts you would like to share with us on what we read up until now? Now you got to say something.
No.
Okay, that was something.
May I say something?
Yes, of course. Please.
So before we know that if we should follow the instructions of the Beit Din, we need to know if the Beit Din is the instruction is given by a legitimate organization.
You're right. They have to be qualified and they have to be certified. A certified Beit Din. Not just a certified Beit Din, we're talking about the Supreme Court of Israel.
So do we still have that system now in Israel?
No, we haven't had that for 2,000 years, unfortunately. However, hopefully, we will eventually have it again. It will be reinstituted.
So it means that nowadays, if we have the instruction from a Beit Din or a consistoire in a galus, so we as a Jew have to use our own effort to certify if we follow it or not.
Exactly. Exactly. It is very important for everybody to know the laws, at least the laws that they need to keep. Nobody is exempt. You know, if there's no certified Beit Din, none of this actually matters, because everybody is personally responsible for the transgressions that they make. There is nobody you can say, oh, I relied on his instruction, and therefore I am patur, I'm exempt.
But that idea still exists today.
What's that?
That idea that you just said, that still exists today.
What do you mean? The idea? Which idea?
That we are responsible for knowing halakha, and we cannot say, well, we relied on someone else's instruction.
So not only are we responsible for knowing halakha, but we are also responsible and personally liable, even in a case where our teacher made a mistake.
Okay, but
that's the main point. My main point is that even the chief rabbi of Israel is liable to make mistakes, and it's Ashira's own personal responsibility to know not to follow his mistaken instruction if he made a mistake.
So does that mean every instruction that we get, we should be looking up ourselves, the halakha, to know it for ourselves?
Absolutely.
Wow, this is big. Here I understand also the commandment. You should know, it's written expressly in Torah. It's not only the hearing. You have to have your own personal.
Right, you have to have your understanding. You have to be knowledgeable.
Wow, this is great. I don't think anywhere in the world this exists to such.
That was my introduction.
What is your opinion about, like, I know in the Sephardi world it's not so much, but like with women, like knowing the halakha well?
What we say here, Shar Shidaem Hakol. This is the Ramban. He writes this in the fundamentals of the Torah. Everybody can know them. A child, Gadol veKatan, right? An adult and a child, Ish veIsha, man and woman. Everybody needs to be well enough versed in halakha to know when the Supreme Court makes a wrong instruction. Again, over here, we're not talking about two people who had a dispute between them and came to court, and the court reached a certain verdict, and then you say, oh, no, they're wrong. I'm sorry, I don't accept their verdict. I know for a fact that they're wrong. Right? We're talking about things that if you transgress them accidentally, you would be liable to bring a korban. Those are the cases. For instance, the example that I brought, eating bread made from wheat on Pesach. Right? So in a dispute, you have to listen to the instruction of the Beit Din. This isn't that'll never be one of the cases. Right? Where you owe him $10,000, they say, no, I'm sorry, the Beit Din, they don't know what they're talking about. It could be that they don't know what they're talking. It could be that they made a mistake, but you still have to follow their instruction. Okay? Any more questions?
Oh, can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
So what is the current Beit Din system is like?
That's a good question, and we only actually addressed that towards the end of the course.
Okay.
In one line, I'll say there is no central Beit Din authority. There's what's called Beit Din Shel Yechidin, right? Meaning they can only make they have local jurisdiction. If they want to come up with a minhag saying, for instance, that rice, although rice isn't hametz, however, we are going to forbid rice because a gezerah, we think there's a problem. Once upon a time in our areas, they used to mix rice together in the wheat and barley sacks, and we're afraid that people cooking rice are going to have wheat in there, and it's going to make hametz. So we're going to forbid it. And that's what they did, in Europe. They forbade eating rice on Pesach. The Sephardim, right? I'm Sephardi. I eat rice on Pesach, no problem. We never accepted those. We never even heard of necessarily of those prohibitions, because the courts that prohibited that only had local jurisdiction, and they were also addressing a specific issue in Europe. And my family, who comes from Morocco, they never had those issues, and we never saw fit. But generally, Sephardim are a lot more lenient and a lot less prohibitions. So any court throughout the past 2,000 years only has local jurisdiction. The question really is today, what's the situation today where we still have, local jurisdiction of the chief rabbinate of Israel is the state of Israel, which contains the majority of the Jewish people.
Sammy, I have a question.
Yes.
Why, when it comes to Sephardi halacha, because I'm converting Sephardi and my rabbi is also Sephardi back home in San Diego, so I'm proud Sephardi, that every time we talk about Sephardi halacha, we're like,
Is this Rabbi Shviti from Shviti?
yes, you know him?
I love him.
Yes, yes.
I don't know him. I've never met him personally. It's, Yonatan Halevi, Rabbi Yonatan Halevi.
Yes,
Yes, I love Yonatan Halevi. You're in good hands.
Thank you. And we say, Sephardi halacha is lenient, and I'm bothered by this because I have conversations with, lots of other people in Israel on the Ashkenazi side, and they're like, oh, you don't keep kosher the same, or you don't do this. And I don't like to use the word lenient. I like to use the word that Sephardi just keep halacha. That's what it is,
Yeah.
And
But
there's
when we say lenient, what we mean is that we didn't accept any extra stringencies that were later on imposed. We accept whatever was.
Other people hear it as like less than. When
my friends, they call me Harav Hamitir. Whenever they have a question and they want to get an answer saying you're allowed, they call me.
Yeah.
Harav Hamitir.
Yes. And I'm like, it's halacha, like it's not a less than.
Well, you're right. But that's kind of restraying a little bit from.
Yes, I know. It's
any more questions on this topic for now?
I want to say I choose Sephardi is because Sephardi is more sages and more Kabbalah.
Okay, that's a nice way to put it. More sages, meaning based on the actual instructions of the Chachamim in the Talmud, without all the extras.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. All right. Anybody else want to become Sephardi? Now's the time. All right. ומנין שאין הכתוב מדבר אלא בבית דין הגדול. And how do we know that this law only pertains to the Supreme Court of Israel? שנאמר ועם כל עדת ישראל ישגו. Right? If the entire congregation ומנין שעד שכולן ראויים להוריה, and how do we know that everyone taking part in that instruction are qualified to instruct. Shneimar im me'aneh ha'edah. If right, if the people, if the eyes of the edah of the community are the ones who gave the wrong instruction, ad shiyu lahem ke'enayim, right? They have to be function as the eyes of the nation, meaning able to instruct the nation. That they are the seers. V'lahalan hu omer v'shafetu ha'edah, right? And regarding execution of a person, right? Capital punishment says v'shafetu ha'edah, right? And we know that ha'edah over there means the Supreme Court of Israel. So we do a gezerah shava, one of those 13 midot that we learned about. V'shafetu ha'edah ma'edah ha'amura b'dinei nefashot כולן ראויים להוריה, אף עדה האמורה בשגגה זו, עד שיהיו כולן ראויים להוריה. Right? So what that, as the Edah talking about capital punishment, we know from our Masoret that it means, that they have to be qualified to instruct. So too, when it says, im me'aneh Edah over here, the Edah here also needs to be of judges, 71 judges who are qualified to instruct. V'chen, im horu v'yada echad mehem sheta'u. Right? If they gave the instructions, 70 out of the 71 dayanim sitting in the court said it's mutar to eat wheat on Pesach. And one of them said, no, it's asur to eat wheat. Wheat is one of the 5 grains that are forbidden on Pesach. And he said, you are wrong. Right? But they voted, and they were more permitting than forbidding. Right? And they permitted. Beit Din peturin v'chol mi she'asa al piyem hayav. Right? Even in this case, Beit Din is patur because there was someone who said, no, you are wrong. And everyone who followed their instruction needs to bring a hatat kivua al shegigatu. Shneimar ve'im kol adat Yisrael yishgu ad sheyishgu kol hasanhedrin. Right? The entire Sanhedrin, the entire Supreme Court needs to give this wrong instruction in order for me and you to be exempt from bringing the Qurban. Yada ehad min as-sanhedrin o mi'utan sheta'u ha-metirin. Right? One of the 71, he knew that they made a mistake, or maybe even like 30 Hachamim in the Sanhedrin knew that there was a mistake. V'shatku, but they didn't say anything. They kept silent. הואיל והורו ולא היה שם חולק, ופשטה ההוראה ברוב הקהל, הרי בית דין חייבים בקורבן, וכל שעשה על פיהם פטור. Right? Since it was the entire Beit Din, because there was nobody who spoke up and said, oh, you are wrong, then the Beit Din needs to bring the Qurban, but the people are exempt from bringing the Qurban themselves. The elu sheshatku, but those who kept silent, those who knew, im asu al pi elu shehoru hare elu hayavim. Right? There were 30 dayanim there. They said, no, wheat is asur. The Beit Din said it's mutar, and they said, okay, well, if the Beit Din said it's mutar, even though I know that it's asur, I'm going to rely on their instruction, and I'm going to make bread from wheat on Pesach. All right, they need to bring a Qurban themselves. Okay, so the Beit Din brings the Qurban. The 4 million people who follow their instruction are exempt from bringing a Qurban. Those 30 Hachamim who relied on their instruction, even though they knew it was wrong, they also need to bring a Qurban themselves. Because they weren't relying on the Beit Din. They knew for themselves the halakha that wheat is asur mishum hames on Pesach. So if they knew for a fact that wheat is asur on Pesach, it's one of the 5 grains, and they baked bread from wheat on Pesach and they ate it, why do they bring a korban? Shouldn't they get correct? They deliberately ate bread from wheat on Pesach, even though they knew that it was asur. Any ideas? Their punishment is as if
Is
they accidentally did it, and not as if they deliberately did it. Yeah, is there? Elena? You want
Yes,
to-
I was gonna say that the majority told them that it was okay, so it's kind of like not their fault in a way.
But they knew that they were wrong. And they are Supreme Court justices themselves. And they are Re'uim Lehora'ah. They don't just know, they're the most qualified to know, and they knew. Meaning, me and you say, okay, well, how do you call it? We're new to this stuff. What do we know? The Beit Din said, I thought I heard once that it's asur, but if the Beit Din said it's mutar, I can rely on them. But we're talking about the chief rabbis, where 30 of them knew that it's asur, and they ate it anyways because the rest of their friends said it's mutar. Why are they punished with karet, as if they deliberately did it?
But I thought that they would still have to follow the majority. In these cases, don't they have to follow the majority anyway?
The majority says it's mutar. They don't say you have to.
Okay, so you're saying that they got... Okay,
So
then I'm confused.
Yeah,
Can I try?
sure.
Because they didn't take extra measures to guard themselves.
What's that?
Because they didn't take extra measure to guard themselves against eating chametz on Pesach.
Oh, so they know it's hametz, but they follow. They say, you know what? The Beit Din made a mistake. I'm going to take advantage and eat hametz anyways.
But they should have been more careful not to eat.
Right. Oh, yeah. Okay. So the question, my question is, why are they being punished as if they did it accidentally, as opposed to being punished as if they did it deliberately? They should get a worse punishment. They know it was asur. Right. So Maimonides, he brings an answer to that question in his commentary to the Mishnah. He says, right? That one who knew that they made a wrong instruction, but he followed their instruction. Right? We said he is hayav, he has to bring korban. So hayav could be maybe hayav karet. He says no, he has to bring korban. Yesh lahakshot alav, right? You can challenge and say, V'zechi ho'il sheyada sheta'u ve'asa mezidhu, right? If he knows that their instruction was wrong and he did it anyways, then he should be considered as if he did it deliberately. Mezidhu. Ve'mezid eno hayav korban. And someone who does it deliberately doesn't need to bring a korban because he gets karet. Ufiruk kushiyazu k'mo she'avarenu. Says, and the answer to this kushia is as I will explain. שהוא שגג במה שאמר יתברך על פי התורה אשר יורוך. Right? He was mistaken for misunderstanding the mitzvah על פי התורה אשר יורוך. Right? We have a mitzvah that says you have to follow the instruction of the Beit Din. This mitzvah doesn't apply in this case. Their mistake was that they thought Al Pi HaTorah Shel Yerucha does apply in this case. V'hashav sheraui la'asot al pihem va'afilu ta'u v'yada b'te'utan. And he thought that because the pasuk says al pi haTorah asher yorucha, as they instruct you, then you need to follow them, even if you know that they are wrong. So while he was mizid by eating the bread on Pesach, we say he's shogeg because he misunderstood a different law, that you have to follow their instruction no matter what, because it's not the meaning of the law. And therefore, that's why he followed their instruction. ולא יצטרף לאשר עשו שגגה ואפילו על פיהם. He says, and that's why, even though everybody else is exempt from bringing a korban, right? We said in this case, the Beit Din brings a korban. These 30 individuals who were in the Beit Din and voiced their objection, saying, we know it's asur, but they did it anyways, they need to bring it because they were wrong on a different mitzvah, the mitzvah of al pi haTorah asher yorucha, and not on Hametz b'Pesach. Is that understood? Any questions, clarifications?
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Is this a kind of similar principle? Why Israelites were forgiven about golden calf? Aaron.
Sorry, same principle as?
The reason why Israelites were forgiven about golden calf. There must have been people who didn't want to follow, but yet followed because Aaron made it.
Okay, all right. That's I never thought of that. That's an interesting. It's an interesting question. I'll have to look into that. That's an interesting question. However, pay attention though. How many people actually sinned on the golden calf? The Torah could be very dramatic, right? So everybody sinned in the golden calf. The numbers don't lie. We know there's 600,000 Jewish men. So add the women and children, we're talking about 1.5 million people at least who were present, right? And it says, right, Hirgui Shachi Vishat Kirovo, right? Where they said, okay, Shevet Levi came, and they said, okay, you're gonna go and kill everybody who participated in the golden calf. How many people were killed that day? It's 3,000. 3,000 out of 1.5 million, right? That's it. Those were the only sinners, and their penalty for that sin was death. So in the end, they were actually punished by death. The rest of the nation, they were exempt. They didn't participate, according to the Peshat. If you read between the lines.
I see. Thank you.
So remember, the Torah could sometimes be dramatic. You need to learn how to read between the lines.
Well, thank you so much.
Okay, so that's the end of this section. This section we did last week already, remember? But the authority of the Nevi'im, the prophets themselves. We have one last section to finish this chapter, or the second chapter of this course. I'd like to try to finish it today, because next week I want to study with you guys a midrash. All right, we're going to read a midrash that's brought in the Talmud. It's a very famous, well-known midrash, and we're also going to analyze it. Analyze the midrash, and remember we spoke about how sometimes the Hachamim they speak in parables, and sometimes there are these fantastic midrashim. For instance, the one that we're going to study next week about the tree, the carob tree, being completely uprooted and flying 100 meters away, right? But then when you analyze the midrash, you see, okay, what what is the caribetry trying to signify, and what's its meaning? All right, so I want to do that with you next week, and that midrash, I think, will also, when we properly understand it, it'll summarize everything we learned up until now. All right, so let's finish this last section. It's not too deep. I mean, it's not really deep. It's more just information. Tekufat HaShoftim VeNevi'im. These are the generations of, we say, Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai, received Torah from Sinai, and he passed it on to Umsara, Kibel Torah Sinai, Umsara Yehoshua, Yehoshua LeZkenim, and Zkenim LeNevi'im, uNevi'im Esaru al Anshe Knesset HaGdola. Right, so we have Moshe passed it to Joshua. Joshua passed it on to the Zkenim and the Nevi'im, the prophets, and the prophets passed it on to the men of the Great Assembly. But that period, Moshe to Yehoshua is one generation. Yehoshua to Zkenim is practically the same generations. Zkenim and Nevi'im, right? That Nevi'im period is a really long period, right? We're talking about all the way to 1,000 years after. We're talking about a period of like 1,000 years, not one generation, 1,000 years. So we're going to quickly go over 1,000 years. Ve'imot Yehoshua masar leZkenim ma shekibel mehapirushim, right? And when Yehoshua came, his time came to pass away, he passed on to the Zkenim, right, the elders of his generations, all the pirushim that he got from Moshe. The entire tradition that he received from Moshe, because maybe there were new Zkenim who came in. And everything else that arose in his generation that there was no dispute on. And also the things that there was a dispute on them when they came before the court. Right, but they made Pesach Halacha according to the majority opinion. So he passed all that on to the next generation. Was him and his court passed it on to the next generation's court. Vehem she'amar b'hem hakatuv v'chol yemei haZkenim asher erichu yamim acharei Yehoshua. Right, and this is the pasuk that says, in all the Zkenim who lived past the times of Yehoshua, because remember Yehoshua was old. He was one of the people who left Egypt. He was already an old man at the times, by the time they entered the land and later on. So all the Zkenim, everyone who was born in the desert during that time and lived on past Yehoshua. Right, and those Hachamim who lived past Yehoshua, they transmitted the Torah to the prophets who were the next generations. Right, and the prophets, they also transmitted the Torah from to each other as the heads of the Sanhedrin. And we'll see that most prophets were also presidents in the Sanhedrin itself. And there wasn't a single generation that didn't have more chidushim, more new questions that came to court, and new halachot that were learned. וכל דור היה עושה דברי קודמיו ליסוד, ומהם לומד ומחדש. And every generation would set as a foundation all the new laws that came before the previous courts. Right? We saw previously that they had no obligation to do that. A new court who receives a new case, which is similar to a previous case that came before a previous court, is allowed to make its own Pesach and disregard and go against the previous court's decisions. Every court has the right to do that. However, generally speaking, they always accepted the previous court's decisions and kept it as a foundation to make new laws later on. והיסודות המקובלים לא היה בהם שום מחלוקת, right? And all of the foundational misvot and halachot, which we have already previously received by tradition, there was never any dispute on them. وزكنيم ربين كبلوا من يهوشع, and many زكني, many حخامim received from Yehoshua. وكبل علی من الزكنيم ومن Pinchas. Now he's going to go through these generations of the Nevi'im. The first one was Eli. Eli received Torah, received his tradition directly from the Zekanim and from Pinchas. Pinchas lived a very long life. This is the grandson of Aharon HaKohen, right? The grandson of Aharon HaKohen, who we saw received also Torah directly from Moshe. He was one of the teachers of Eli HaKohen. Shmuel kibel me'eli ubedino, and Shmuel, the prophet himself, his teacher was Eli. He received directly from Eli. David kibel mishmuel ubedino, and David, he was a king, King David. He was also president of the court, of the Supreme Court. His teacher, his rabbi, was Shmuel Hanavi. ואחיה השינוני מיוצאי מצרים היה, ולוי היה, right, next generation who received from David was Ahya Shinoni. He was very young at the times of the Exodus, in the desert, and he lived a very, very long life. V'shama mi Moshe, and he heard from Moshe 4 times. Everybody heard that from Moshe. But he was young then. He lived an extremely long life. So he was able to learn from Eli, from Shemuel, from David, from Pinchas. Right? Next is Eliyahu. The prophet Eliyahu Hanavi, and the student of Eliyahu was well known as Elisha. He received his tradition from Eliyahu, Beit Din. Pay attention, everybody here is Beit Din. It's not one person transmitting to another person, because there's no Torah Sod. It's the entire court transmitting to the next court, having a whole new generation of students. And along with the courts is the entire nation, who is always welcome to come and learn from the courts. Ve'yehoyada HaKohen kibel me'elisha ubedino. By the way, I just want to point out that Rabbi Yonatan Halevi, who we mentioned before, has a whole series on the introduction where he has a class on every single one of these generations, which if anyone really wants to delve into it, this is more like a crash course. He really goes very, very deep, and he has like an entire hour and a half class on each one of these generations. Uzchariyahu kibel me'yehoyada ubedino. I think it's in English, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, all his classes are in English. Uzchariyahu kibel me'yehoyada ubedino. Right, and Zechariah that we know, Zechariah Navi, he received from Yehoyada. Yehoyada he was a Kohen Gadol as well. Vehoshea kibel mi-Zechariah. Right, these are all prophets that we know. Most of them have books named after them in the Bible. Hoshea received from Zechariah. Amos also, he has a book on his name. Amos kibel me-Hoshea ubedino. Ve'Yishayahu, right, kibel me-Amos ubedino, he received from the court of Amos. Umicha, right, the Navi Micha kibel me-Yishayahu ubedino. Ve'Yoel kibel me-Micha ubedino. Ve'Nahum kibel me-Yoel ubedino. Ve'Habakuk kibel me-Nahum ubedino. Usfania kibel me-Habakuk ubedino. Yirmiyahu, we're reaching the end of the prophets. One of the last prophets was Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah. Kiben mi-Sefania ubedino, he received from Sefania, who received from Habakuk, who received from Yoel, who received from Micha. Right? You can go backwards. Yirmiyahu kiben mi-Sefania ubedino. Baruch ben Neriah was a student of Yirmiyahu. Kiben Yirmiyahu ubedino, he received this tradition from Yirmiyah. And now these are the last of the prophets, right? The generation of Yirmiyahu, or more so the generation of Ezra. Ezra, the scribe. This is the generation that instituted the men of the Great Assembly and Shekneset HaGedolah. Ve'Ezra ubed dino kibelu mi-Baruch ubed dino. And these are the last of the prophets. Beit Dino shel Ezra, right? The court of Ezra הם הנקראים אנשי כנסת הגדולה. These are the men of the great assembly. והם חגי, זכריה, מלאכי ודניאל. Right? They also have books named after them. Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. They were all friends of Daniel. They're all in the book of Daniel. Nehemiah also has a book on himself. Israel, Nehemiah, Ben Chachliah, Mordechai. Mordechai has a book named after his niece, right? The Megillat Esther. This is Mordechai from the Megillah. He was part of the Supreme Court of Ezra. And Zerubbabel is also mentioned in the book of Israel, Nehemiah. Veharbe Hachamim imahem, and among them there are many other Hachamim. The total of the Hachamim who represented the Supreme Court back then grew from 71 Tashlum 120 Zekinim. Right, grew from 71 to 120. And someone, I don't remember who it was, one of you pointed out that the Knesset today also consists of 120 members, and the truth is it was actually modeled after Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, same name and same number of representatives. And the truth is that this Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, since this was a time where we didn't have our own autonomy, they also were the political leadership of the people. And that's why they grew from 71 judges to 120 leaders of the Jewish people, who were also judges and also administrators and political leaders. This is what we say in Pirkei Avot, right? Shimon HaTzadik, Misheyareh Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. He is of the remainders, the last ones of Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, right? He was also a Kohen Gadol. He was the high priest in the Beit Mikdash. Shimon HaTzadik, there's a very famous story about him meeting Alexander the Great, which is also a nice midrash we can study sometime. He was one of the 120, וקיבל תורה שבעל פה מכולן. And he received the Torah שבעל פה from all of Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. He met Mordechai, he met Daniel, he met Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. והוא היה כהן גדול אחר Ezra. Ezra was also a high priest, and the high priest after Ezra was Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon HaTzadik is buried right to the north of the old city in Jerusalem. Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. Right, that's it, yeah. Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, the men of the great assembly, him Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, ועזרא הסופר, ונחמיה בן חכניה, ומרדכי וזרובבל בן שאלתיאל, ועם אלו הנביאים תשלום 120 זקנים, זקן מן החרש והמסגר ודומיהם. We said חרש and the מסגר, they just were like the lower level in society, the lower class people who all came back to Eretz Israel under the license of Koresh, right? Cyrus, the king of Persia. וגם הם עסקו בעיון, and all these people were all, great Hachamim in the Sanhedrin, and they all studied, delved in deeper, כמו שעשו קודמיהם, right, as the previous generations. וגזרו גזרות, and they also enacted certain new prohibitions. There are certain things that were, actually there was a lot instituted by Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. For instance, most of the berachot that we say were instituted by Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. Most of the tefillot, the nosach, right? The actual wording of the tefillot, when we pray shaharit and mincha and arvit, those were written by Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. V'tiknu takanot, all right? And they instituted certain enactments, such as the tefillot. ואחרון אותה חבורה הטהורה הוא ראשון לחכמים שנזכרו במשנה, והוא שמעון הצדיק. Right? And the last of that holy assembly, those pure people, the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, the last of them was Shimon HaTzadik, and he is the first of the Chachamim who are mentioned in the Mishnah. The next period in the evolution of the Torah shebe'al peh is when the Torah shebe'al peh is no longer be'al peh. Right? Up until now, everything is transmitted orally. Shimon HaTzadik and onwards is when they start to gather all of the traditions and start putting them in writing. And we will, not next week, but after that, we will move on to the third chapter. The third section is the Tanaim, right? Tanaim are those Hachamim that are mentioned in the Mishnah itself. The first of them is Shimon HaTzadik, who is the last of Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, who were the last generation of the Nevi'im, who received from Yehoshua, who received from Moshe. And he himself, as we said, Haya Kohen Gadol Be'oto Hador. He was also the high priest in that generation. And that's the end of this second section of the course. The period of the Nevi'im.